The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is, I would say, the first episode. It's not really the first episode, but it is the rebranded Hard Rock Empire. Every Sunday night, we bring you the best rock and metal music. We've been doing it for over a year, but now we've kind of branded this as its own thing going forward. It is the Hard Rock Empire, where we will be joining you almost every Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Next week will be a little bit early, but really looking forward to kind of being able to take this branding and hopefully we'll get maybe a few more shares out of some bands with kind of more of the metal branding rather than our overall Nerdcast Empire. Of course, you can always catch us on twitch.tv/Nerdcast Empire and live on our YouTube page each and every Sunday night at 7. We are talking rock and metal. We're talking the best new music from February the 14th coming up in this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. And joining me in studio, as always, on this Sunday evening is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going. I just think the rebrand was necessary, given we no longer live in a world of babyface John Cena. And if he's going to turn heel, then I think we also need some sort of change in image. And here we are with the Hard Rock Empire. February 14th, a lot of really good music and fun news, and let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want our thoughts on the Elimination Chamber and everything that happened after that, you can join us tomorrow morning for the Nerdcast News Report at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be spending a good deal of time talking about what was a pretty wild evening in WWE. So we're definitely looking forward to that coming up tomorrow morning. But we're talking all things music tonight. And before we get to the new music, as Mike said, this was an excellent week for music. There are a lot of bands. When I post the playlist in the chats, I definitely encourage you to check this out. I think this was one of the strongest weeks of music we've had really since before Christmas, when things kind of started to die down for the holidays. I think we could have each probably picked 4 bands each and would have still had good bands that would have got left behind. So excited to talk about that. That'll be in the second part of the show. We're going to get to some news headlines first, as we always do. And we'd like to talk about big festivals, especially if they're somewhat local to us. So the first festival we're going to be talking about today is the Louder Than Life Festival, as that is coming up, of course, in Louisville, Kentucky on September 18th through the 21st. Huge festival with tons of bands. The announcement of at least most, if not all, of the lineup came out at the end of last week, and obviously just some really big names in rock and metal and whatever else some of these bands fall under that maybe aren't rock and metal. But Mike, I know you've had a chance to kind of look through this very extensive list. Just curious to kind of get your initial thoughts on this lineup for this really what has been a really, really good festival.
Yeah, I went to their website because I feel like the visual of the breakdown of artists and what days they play and what stages, it's a little easier to digest than just the single column list of bands. But yeah, I think all things considered, there is some overlap with Sonic Temple, obviously, and there are certainly a few bands I wish were at Sonic Temple, but I think all in all, it's a stronger lineup than what Louder Than Life's bringing.
Yeah.
It's hard for it not to be when you have Metallica headlining 2 nights, Linkin Park on a 3rd night.
For sure.
Like, clearly, as far as the headliners go, I love Slayer and Avenged Sevenfold, but I don't think Louder Than Life has that same kind of heft that Sonic Temple's bringing this year. I did kind of point out on each day a few of what I think are the bands that stick out.
Yeah.
Thursday felt pretty light to me. You got Slayer, Rob Zombie, Marilyn Manson, all worth seeing, I think. Friday, you got Avenged Sevenfold, Static X, Dope, Hollywood Undead, Dream Theater, Powerwolf, and Dragon Force. That stage that Dream Theater's on in general, you got Dream Theater headlining that, Powerwolf, Dragon Force, Ailstorm, Demon Hunter, Glory Hammer, and Liliac. I'm not familiar with them, but that seems like it's kind of the closest thing you get to like the power/progressive metal, that stuff that you would see at Wacken probably.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a standout stage. On Saturday, we got not a lot as far as the very top of the card for me, but Stone Temple Pilots, Trivium, Machine Head, Hawthorne Heights just seems kind of like a band out of nowhere, but I wouldn't mind seeing them, Ohio guys. It's always cool. And then finally on Sunday, you got 3 Days Grace, Bruce Dickinson, Testament, Queensryche, Sebastian Bach, Accept, Yngwie Malmsteen. There's clearly like 2 stages over the weekend where they're like, let's just throw together a list that Mike would really be into, and I think that's kind of the Dream Theater group and then the Bruce Dickinson group on Sunday. But yeah, I mean, they mentioned in the article that they're really about showcasing the future of rock and heavy music while honoring the legends who paved the way. I still feel like a lot of these festivals, there's some subsegments of metal that are very current, that are thriving and getting bigger, that maybe aren't being represented as well as I would like to see. And maybe in the next few years we can kind of get them to the point where they're being represented in some of the bigger festivals.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of those things that unfortunately some of these groups you have to go overseas to get to see them in a festival setting. And that's a shame because again, these giant festivals are a perfect opportunity to really have stages for everybody. And you mentioned a little bit of that going on here. Maybe a little more of that here than at Sonic Temple, but there's still kind of a hole where you've got some of your melodic metal that we talk about a lot on this podcast that you have to go to the Frontiers event in Italy, or you have to go other places where they have these festivals to get a chance to see these bands. And I don't understand why you wouldn't try to have at least one day or one stage where you could bring some of these current bands in, because goodness knows, as we talk about on this podcast, there are a lot of these bands. We're not just talking about maybe the underground ones that are just getting started, which there are a lot of those, but there are these bands that have been doing this for 30 years that are still churning out music that you 100% could bring in to do one of these festivals.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we've noticed just from doing this podcast is even domestically, there are quite a few traditional metal bands that are up and running here in the States. Power metal, I mean, they have the Mad with Power Festival up in Wisconsin. Any of those bands would be really cool to bring in. Last year we featured several kind of horror punk bands that I think would be a really cool thing to add to your festival. I think there's a lot of domestic hard rock and metal that isn't necessarily modern metal, but are modern bands. And
Yeah.
I think just to add some variety to your festival, I think it would be really cool to see them included.
For sure. I think there's no doubt that I would love to see a little more representation from those groups in these giant festivals.
Mega Colossus would be a great band.
For sure.
For either of these.
Yeah. And again, you can check out their website. I'm sure that there are bands that people want to go see, and Louisville's a great city. I've been a few times. We saw Sonata Arctica there twice at a venue much smaller than this one, at a pool hall in Louisville, Kentucky. But really cool city. Got a lot of friends that live down that way, and I know, like last year, I think they had some weather issues with this festival. That is the downside to having a festival in September in this part of the country, is that sometimes you can really get some nasty weather.
I do have to ask, on Sunday, the third stage down, what's the headlining band?
Is it the one that just appears to be censored?
It's above Flyleaf. I don't know if maybe they haven't made the announcement on that yet.
That could be.
Or their logo is just a really bad smeared red blotch.
I mean, both are possible. I don't know. Like, it would be weird to be hiding a band on the third stage on Sunday of all things. That seems kind of odd, unless
that was a band that, because I know there have been several bands toward the end of last year, beginning of this year, that have dissolved or fallen apart. Maybe that's the case.
Maybe
I'd have to do a little research to figure out what that was about.
Well, we'll try to come up with an answer to that before next week's podcast and let you know what that mystery smudge of red is, and see, because we see the most ridiculous logos every week when we do this podcast. I'm kind of inclined to believe it's actually a logo and not a smudge, but we'll see as we go forward. But again, Louder Than Life coming up in September in Louisville, Kentucky. If maybe you missed out on Sonic Temple, tickets, VIP, or whatever you might want to get for that, this is certainly an alternative. Maybe not, as Mike said, quite as strong a lineup, but still a very solid lineup if you're a fan of rock and metal music. Let's move on to our next topic today. And I always like to, when I see headlines of bands that I know Mike's been fans of, over the years, that I like to pull the stories out. And I guess the news came out that Symphony X is going to be releasing some new music in 2026. This was announced during the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise. on a side note, as I get into this story, I'm still not sure about these giant cruises. We talk a lot about the Jericho cruise. I feel like that just is probably gross, but that's just neither here nor there. But having said that, Symphony X did announce that they're going to have a album. It appears in 2026. It's been a long time since their last album in 2015, which was Underworld. They've been working on new music for a while, so that's exciting to hear that potentially we got some new Symphony X coming this maybe in a year or so. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. The article mentions an interview with Michael Lapon, the bassist from Symphony X, where he basically says that they've been working on new material for years with big symphonic riffs, heavy riffs, classical elements, what you'd expect from Symphony X. He also pointed out that Michael Romeo, the guitarist and kind of lead songwriter of the band, has this rule against filler songs. So if you think maybe it takes them a while to churn out an album, it's because if they put together a song and it doesn't really resonate with all of them, they just toss it and start over again. It's kind of wild, but I think when you have a band that leans so heavily into kind of that neoclassical style, I'm not surprised that they're kind of perfectionist about the sound. They mentioned in the article, they mentioned that there's going to be something, quote, crazy epic on it. Not too surprising with Symphony X. I think back to their album, The Odyssey from 2002, when they had the 7-part title track of The Odyssey. 1996, the Divine Wings of Tragedy album also had a 21-minute, 7-part opus title track. So, yeah, it'll be fun once we get around to hearing it. They mentioned their prior album felt a little more stripped down, so I think this is going to be maybe a little more return to that neoclassical form that you kind of expect from Symphony X.
Yeah, I'm expecting it to be totally ridiculous. I mean, 11 years is a long time, even if you do have to throw out some songs along the way. But like you said, I mean, it's kind of par for the course for these bands that really take their music very seriously, that it is something that it's like they don't want to put something out if they're not proud of putting their name on it. So I guess in that regard, I'm not surprised it's taken 11 years to potentially release this album, assuming it does come out in 2026.
But in the meantime, it seems like Russell Allen keeps busy.
For
His
sure.
His name shows up everywhere.
As it should, because every band should want to bring him in to sing for
Absolutely.
them. We've talked a lot about Alan Land and some of the other side projects he's been involved in, and to me, it's like if I were Frontiers Records, I'd be calling him like, hey, we've got 8 bands we need a lead singer for over the next 6 months. You want to come in and just knock out a few albums while you're waiting to record the Symphony X thing? But that dude's incredibly talented. And like I said, I'm sure this album's going to be amazing. It's going to be ridiculous, which I think is why it's going to be amazing. But really excited, honestly, to get to hear.
If it's a band you're not super familiar with, just right off the bat, check out Divine Wings of Tragedy. I think to me that's a great entry point to the band and really shows off Romeo's guitar playing, which is just absurd, and Alan's ridiculous voice as well.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk more about that album as we go back through the vault coming up over the next
possibility.
Few months. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the last segment of this show. But if you're a fan of Symphony X, you got some new stuff, at least on the horizon, a little ways away. One other story, and the really reason I brought this up was because we spent a lot of time talking about the grunge era and what happened to a lot of bands in the early 90s when they just kind of, I don't say fell off the face of the earth, but it all of a sudden went from being played on radio and having big hits and all that stuff to basically not. And a lot, there were a lot of those bands that continued on, and we've talked about them on this podcast, and they never went away. They just weren't played on the radio anymore. And there were some that just packed up shop and said, oh, our era's over. Tracy Guns did an interview. This is from Blabbermouth, but it was originally an interview with the Rock Experience with Mike Brunn, basically talking about that era. And I think he makes some good points, and then others I think maybe he's kind of missed the mark a little bit. But he basically talks about, how kind of all things have a cycle, and, it's just kind of one of those things that he doesn't seem to blame the grunge bands for anything, with LA Guns and basically kind of losing popularity there in the early 90s. But I also feel like to some degree he oversimplifies kind of what happened there in the early 90s. And, we're not asking for a pity party for those bands, but at the same time, a little sympathy for what those guys went through that was really no fault of their own, might be required here.
Yeah, I do agree with him in regards to it kind of being the natural progression of things. He compares the 80s to one big party, and kind of that grunge movement that took over was just the hangover afterwards. We've spent from being 18 to 22 or 23 just partying and acting crazy, and then you wake up one morning and you have a family and responsibilities and a job, and it's no longer a party every day, and you kind of have to wake up to the reality of reality, basically. I think I get that, and I do think in a lot of cases some of those bands really had just kind of played themselves out and they really had nothing left to offer, but that wasn't the case for everybody. I think you do have instances where there were bands that were unfairly lumped into that hair metal movement that just couldn't gain any traction because people perceived them in a certain way that may not have been accurate. And even bands who had put out a few albums and were doing really well kind of in that realm of pop metal that still had more to offer, but no one was going to take them seriously. They weren't given the opportunity to let their sound evolve to something more palatable in the early to mid 90s. They weren't given any attention at that point. I think, what was I going to say about that?
Well, you think about that, just to kind of to piggyback off of that, we've spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about bands, whether they're in the vault, and we spent a lot of time talking about vault bands that released things in this era that just didn't hit, or they had one song that hit, and then the follow-up album just bombed because people didn't want to hear it anymore. And there are some of these bands that did just continue, like, hey, we're just going to keep releasing albums, and we don't really care if people buy them or not. We're just our fans are going to like them. And, they did manage to survive it, but it was tough for a lot of bands in this era.
Yeah, I think ultimately kind of the point I was going to make was that it just felt like they grossly overcorrected on things.
Yeah.
It was, let's introduce this new sound that we're going to tell everyone they need to like, which, is kind of how the industry works. But at the same time, it was let's vilify everything that came before, to the point where, there are plenty of documentaries out there chronicling the events that kind of happened in the early 90s, and there were instances where bands would be in the middle of a video shoot and just told, oh yeah, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
You're done. Or I remember years ago there being one where Janie Lane walked into the record company office, and one day they had all their posters up in the entryway, and then the next day all gone and replaced with Pearl Jam or something. I think everything had to progress, but man, you really got a glimpse of how ruthless that world is, and still is when you think of how artists are treated by the industry. It's kind of brutal.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot now with just the streaming and how people don't make any money off of it, and how so many of these bands we talk about every week are independent label bands, or they're in kind of smaller niche labels that are trying to get their bands out there, and because of that, a lot of these artists are, probably have full-time jobs in addition to being musicians, or some of these Frontiers people are in 7 different bands. We mention their names almost every week because they're playing in so many different groups just to try to continue to make money and try to find maybe that one that just takes off, and then you're good to go. But yeah, it's a little sad, but it is interesting to get his perspective. Anytime you have somebody who lived the era, who experienced that, you get it, and you do feel maybe a hint of bitterness in his comments, which is completely understandable. But at the same time, I don't think it's maybe as cut and dry as he kind of makes it out to be.
I think you do kind of see that with a band like theirs, they probably didn't like the idea that they were considered the exact same as so many other bands that maybe didn't have, as far as they're concerned, as much substance as they did. I think once you cast that wide, you're all hair metal, what do you do about that? You can't really shake it. And, I'm glad they're still around doing what they do, but who knows what could have happened had they actually gotten a little more commercial attention after 1991.
No question. There's so many bands that fall into that category. You just wonder what might have been had there been room for everybody, and not just there's only room for one genre to be the top and everybody else just has to go away. Kind of like what happened with disco in the late 70s. I'm not a huge fan of disco, but that went from being everywhere to them, exploding disco records at Comiskey Park on
Yeah.
Disco Demolition Night because people hated it so much. And that was kind of overnight as well. So
Well, you see it today, even where you have every few months some notable music personality comes out and says rock and roll is dead.
Yeah.
It's like, if it's dead, it's because they told you it was dead
Yeah.
over and over again. They stopped playing it. They stopped promoting it. It's still out there. All
Yep.
you have to do is actually listen to it, promote it, throw it in people's faces, have vehicles that people will naturally turn to consume it. They're just not trying. Like, people still like music. You're just telling them what music to like, and it's never rock and roll anymore.
Right. And we can tell you, as we do each and every week, rock and roll is not dead. That's what this podcast is all about, to tell you that not only are there a lot of great new bands that are continuing to produce music, but some of the old stuff you might not know about or maybe have forgotten about is still really awesome. And a lot of those bands are also still out there making great music in 2025, which is really exciting. Before we get to our new music for this week, time to check out, just a reminder, check out to our website, nerdcastempire.com. We've got all of our back podcasts on there. A reminder of our schedule. We have it up on the screen if you're watching on Twitch or on YouTube. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we've got the Nerdcast News Report, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And then Hard Rock Empire every Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Next week will be about 4 hours early, 3 o'clock Eastern Time in the afternoon. I've got to go out of town for a couple of days, so we're going to back it up just a few hours to 3 p.m., but it'll be the same news headlines. And then, of course, next week we'll be talking about the music of February the 21st, so we hope you'll join us 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Be a little better for our friends in Europe next week. And, of course, don't forget next Sunday, if you're planning your schedule ahead, we've got the time change in the United States. So if we were 5 hours different from your location this week, next week will be 4 hours different from your location, as we are going to spring ahead next Sunday. So make your plans, adjust them accordingly so that you join us next week for the Hard Rock Empire on Sunday, and, of course, our news podcasts throughout the week. But it's time to get to the new music for this week. And like I said, I think this is one of the stronger weeks that we've had in quite some time, which is really exciting. I'm going to be posting the playlist in the chats right now. And again, each and every week, Mike will go through and he will pull a list from several different sources that has all of the new rock and metal releases for a given date. In this case, the date is February the 14th. And then he goes through and pulls at least one track off of each of the new albums that are coming out, puts it in a YouTube playlist. That playlist has now been linked in both of the chats. And then we go through and we listen to those songs, and we pick two bands, each of their new releases to spotlight. And like I said, this week we probably could have picked 4 each, and I think we would have still not watered down the quality at all. I think it was just a really strong week of music, and that's why we always encourage you to go back and listen to the playlist yourself, pick your favorite releases from the week. And again, as we always talk about, support these bands, buy their albums, see them on tour, buy their merch, allow them to continue to do the awesome things that they're doing each and every week. And one final reminder, if you're listening to this on our podcast network, you will not get to hear the audio clips. The best place to hear the audio clips without any kind of potential mute or having them disappear is joining us live each and every Sunday night, because that is the one place that we can get them through without being muted at least the first time. With all that said, we've set the table. It's time to move forward. We're going to get to the new music again on February the 14th. Mike will kick us off as always. And again, I was just really impressed with the music choices this week. I really think this is good stuff. But we did have to narrow it down to 4. You've got 2 of them. Get us started with what your first pick is for this week.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier during the Louder Than Life story that there's so much really good metal being made here in the States. You just got to find it and consume it. And this is certainly an example of that. This is an Indiana-based metal band. It's their first full-length album. They had a debut EP that came out in 2022. The band in question is called Prehistoria, and their debut album is Cryptic Halo.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. What I didn't get to listen to the whole album, but what I've listened to, I really did dig these guys. And Indiana, just right next door to us. I'll be over there next week, which is why we're moving the podcast earlier. But definitely a great, solid choice for our first band of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. According to the Metal Archives, the band consists of Ian Bender on bass, Cody Johns on drums, Max Otworth on guitars, Sean Cothran on guitars, and Alonzo Zodonoso on vocals. In their own words from their Bandcamp, this album from Prehistoria is rooted in traditional heavy metal, weaves in elements of power, thrash, and black metal to create a sound that's both classic and dynamic. And it's been crafted by devoted fans of heavy metal for heavy metal fans. It stands as a celebration of the genre we hold so dear. Yeah, giving it a listen, I can definitely hear all of that. I think it definitely leans into the thrash and power metal influences. And there are moments where their music has a certain heaviness where you almost expect to hear more like black metal vocals pick up, but they never do. It has that kind of intensity without veering, like hard veering into black metal, which, given that's not typically my preferred vocal style, I'm totally fine with that. But I think they could actually blend a little bit of that in, and it would still work out for them. When I first discovered power metal back in the late 90s, early 2000s, to me, it was that stuff doesn't get made in America.
No.
If you want to listen to that, you're relegated to listening to German bands or Finnish bands or Swedish bands. It wasn't going to happen. Like, you didn't, this the newest band from the Bay Area playing power. It didn't really happen. So to see there are bands like this, and we see more and more of them, it's just ridiculously inspiring and awesome, and we need more of it, and we need these people booked as many places as possible.
Yeah.
Standout tracks on the album include Rise, Everlasting Legacy, Crown of the Resolute, Crucible of Storms, and the track that I picked to check out, the song Obsidian Gateways.
Let's check these guys out. Again, from Indiana, Prehistoria with their new album Cryptic Halo. This is the 4th track off of this album, Obsidian Gateways. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Had to leave that running just for that high falsetto part in there because it felt very like See You in Hell,
Grim Reaper.
Yeah, Grim Reaper-ish. Yeah, for sure. I just, again, like you said, I never would have imagined years ago that this type of music would be not only being made in America, but being made in Middle America of all places. You're talking about a group from Indiana that has this sound that love this music to this point where this is what you want to play, and it's fantastic, and it would fit right in with any of those European power metal bands that you grew up on, and wouldn't feel out of place against any of them. And like you said, there is a heaviness to their sound maybe that does take it a little bit different direction than maybe traditional power metal, and I think you could even have some heavy vocals with it and it would still work. But what they've done is just really, really awesome.
Yeah, as far as my music taste goes, this is the equivalent of back in the day Slipknot coming out and being from Iowa.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of music doesn't get made in Iowa. That's kind of how this is. Like, this is what's coming out of Indiana now. This is fantastic. Like, let's do more of this.
Yeah, I'm super excited that these guys are from Indiana and would love to see them maybe touring in this area at some point and get a chance to check those guys out in person. But definitely check out Prehistoria. That was really, really good stuff. And again, anytime you got power metal coming out of the U.S., I think that's really awesome. But that was your first pick. You got 2 really excellent picks. The second pick you've got is a band I actually picked their last album back in, I believe it was February of last year.
A year ago.
And these guys are back, and they absolutely have rocked it again. Tell us about pick number 2.
Yeah, so we're going back to the often traveled country of Sweden. A lot of good music being made there. And the band we got now, it's their 9th full-length studio album following last year's kind of compilation re-recorded collection they released. The album is Thrill of the Bite, and the band is Crazy Lixx.
These guys are awesome. I love this album. I thought this was really, really good. Excited that you picked them. Just these guys absolutely nail this sound. It's just amazing. It's It's not easy to do, but they make it sound really easy.
Yeah, they've pretty much nailed the formula. This is a band that first started back in 2002. They do have a new drummer. The prior drummer, Joel Sodetta, left the band last year. He's been replaced by Robin Nilsson. So at this point, the only original member left is Danny Rexon, the vocalist and guitarist. But the band's still rolling on. They haven't really missed a beat. Along with the two members I mentioned, the band's rounded out by Jens Andersson, bassist since 2012, Chris Olsen on guitar since 2016, and Jens Lundgren on guitar also since 2016. When it comes to ultra polished, sleazy arena rock, these guys pretty much are the standard, I think, at this point. The album listing on Frontier's website mentions their inspirations as Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Alice Cooper, Rat, Skid Row, and Guns N' Roses. I think at times they veer a little more toward the Def Leppard side of things with their vocal delivery. Like, it's just a super polished rock sound at times. But you can certainly hear the others as well. I think I talked about this when we featured their album last year, but if you go to their YouTube page, they have music videos, both normal music videos, but also these unofficial soundtrack videos where they take their songs and they set them to classic like 80s and 90s movies as if their song was part of the soundtrack. It's an absolutely brilliant thing to do. And the most recent one I found that I think was uploaded a couple weeks ago is for the song off this album, Who Said Rock and Roll Is Dead. Great song, but it is set to footage from the classic film Wayne's World.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, great song and still great movie. The greatest SNL skit adaptation ever, I believe.
Yeah.
And if you believe otherwise, you're crazy. Standout tracks on the album include Highway Hurricane, Who Said Rock and Roll Is Dead, Little Miss Dangerous, Call of the Wild, Hunt for Danger, and the track that I picked to check out, the song Final Warning.
Before I mute it on the podcast version, we play this clip. I think the only other SNL sketch that comes close as far as like seriously, because obviously you can say something ridiculous like the Night at the Roxbury and be like, oh yeah. But to me, like the only other one that even comes close is the Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
That is the only other one that to me, the movie gets held up on a pedestal.
That's fair.
Beyond. But that's, to me, it's those two and then kind of everything else. And then obviously some that were really bad. But I would agree Wayne's World is number one for sure. But again, if I was 10 years older, I might think otherwise. But with that said, it's time to check out Crazy Lixx again. Love these guys. Great to see them back with another album. Thrill of the Bite is that album. We are checking out track number 9 on that album, Final Warning. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, this was such an easy listen to the point where it's like it was over before I even realized that it was over. Like, oh, that was it. Like it's 41 minutes, which is certainly plenty long enough, but it's such an easy listen that the tracks just run one right to the other, and before you know it, you're through the whole album. And they've got some good plays on some of these tracks, which is great to see. Little Miss Dangerous has over 1 million plays on YouTube Music, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Again, like you said, I think they've just polished the sound. They absolutely know what they're going for. They nail it to a point where if you had told me all these were albums that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, I would totally believe it. But at the same time, they found a way to not make this music sound dated to that era where they're so enamored with capturing that sound that they sacrifice the quality of the music to do it. I think these guys absolutely figured this out, and Frontiers has got a star band on their hands with these guys.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Really, really good release from Crazy Lixx once again. So definitely check those guys out. Thrill of the Bite, their new release this week. I've got 2 albums as well, and went a little different direction with the first one. Not necessarily in the type of music, but just a band that maybe hasn't really hit big yet, but I feel like they're headed in that direction. This is the four-piece rock band from the London area of the United Kingdom. This is Big Canyon with their self-titled Big Canyon. This band started as a three-piece band back in 2020. This is their first full-length release. They did release a mini album back in 2020, but since then have added singer Andy Meacock, and that has taken their band really to a completely different level. He's been around for a while. Didn't have a Wikipedia page or anything for him. I was kind of hoping to maybe kind of get a full list of the bands he's been involved in. I did see he was back with a band called Soliman back in 1993. So this guy's obviously been on the music scene in the UK for a long time. Joining bandmates Ben Williamson on guitar, Julian Palmer on bass, and Leon Ashley on drums. It's a great hard rock, melodic rock sound. They've got some bluesy elements as well, which I always enjoy. It's just another group that I feel like should have more streams on their album than what they have. But with them kind of getting this lineup together and releasing this excellent album, I really do kind of feel like maybe this band is on the way up and we're going to see bigger and better things from them as they continue forward. But standout tracks on this album include Falling, Beautiful Mind, Devil in Disguise, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast, which is Rescue Me. So let's check these guys out. Again, this is Big Canyon with their self-titled Big Canyon. This is track number 1 off of this album, Rescue Me. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Again, it's another really easy listen. I've got through this album pretty quickly, and just like I said, it's got that melodic rock, but also a little bit of blues in there. But just really, really fun album from these guys. Mike, your thoughts on Big Canyon?
Yeah, really good stuff. One thing I've noticed this year so far is that I feel like we have a lot more what I would just consider to be straight up rock bands. Like we talk about so many subgenres all the time, like, oh, this is modern thrash band, and this is power metal, and this is symphonic, and I love all of those. But every now and then, it's cool to just hear a band where you think, I don't have to apply a bunch of extra labels to their sound. They just rock. Like they're not it's not progressive. It's not atmospheric. It's not ambient. It's just they show up and they rock, and I think there's always room for more of that.
Yeah, and it's always enjoyable when you find that on these playlists, just bands that are just rock bands. And again, when you hear people talk about rock being dead, it's like, no, like these guys are just on the way up. Like they're very much alive. And again, I think
they're alive
as far as we know. But again, the addition of the singer with this band, I think, is going to take them to a totally different level. And excited to see when we get the chance to see another album from these guys, maybe later on in the podcast. So really excited to see where Big Canyon goes. But that's my first pick for this week. Pick number 2, we are headed back to one of our favorite countries as well. We're headed to Norway. This is a power melodic metal band from Norway. This is Mantric Momentum with the album Alienized. Their first single was released in 2020, so presumably that was kind of when they got started. This is their second full-length album. It's the follow-up album to 2022's debut, Trial by Fire. This is another Frontiers band, so you kind of know what you're getting with these guys. This is a band of cousins, guitarist Krister Harroy and vocalist Turjay Harroy, who is also the lead singer of the band Pyramaze, who I'm pretty sure we have come across on this podcast. Krister has worked with some of the Frontiers heavy hitters over the years, as he did the singles in the first album, including Yannis Papadopoulos, Joey Vera, and Ralph Sheepers. For this album, he wanted a full-time singer and called his cousin, Turjay from Pyramaze. And they absolutely nail this sound. It's just great AOR melodic metal. what you would expect from Frontiers. I think the thing that really jumps out when you listen to this is the musicianship of the entire album. It just feels like everything is given its space and everything is just really played at a very high level. It has that polish that you would expect from having a record label like Frontiers behind it to kind of make sure that it does. Reviewers had to noted that this album was heavier and maybe less progressive than their first release back in 2022. So I'm kind of interested to see what that sounds like. You do hear some prog elements in this album, but maybe they've just been a little more subdued than the Trial by Fire release back in 2022. Standout tracks include Resilience, Come Undone, Not That Come Undone, The Highest Mountain, and the title track, which is the track we're going to check out on the podcast, Alien Eyes. So check these guys out. Really, really enjoyed this album. We're going to jump to it once I get to the right tab. Mantric Momentum with the album Alien Eyes. This is the title track off of that album. It is track number 3. It is Alien Eyes. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. But yeah, you can obviously vocals are big, music's big. Definitely hear a little bit of progressive type sound in there, but overall, this was really, really outstanding. Your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, another home run. I mean, what else can you say? Pyromaze is a band I've listened to in limited supply. They're someone I've wanted to check out a lot more of, and definitely these guys, add them to the list as well. A band that I definitely need to listen to more of their music.
Yeah, I'm interested to go back and listen to that 2022 release as well. But this is really good beginning to end. If you're a fan of this type of music, which if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are. Definitely encourage you to pick up this new release from Mantric Momentum. I thought it was really outstanding. That takes care of our new releases for this week. It's time to go into the vault, where Mike and I will each give you a classic album to check out. And Mike has literally gone back into the vault. I mean, literally, physically gone back into his vault, where he's going to go through, at least to start with, some of the albums that he owns that, he wants to spotlight on this podcast. And we're going back to the letter A this week. And this is a really fun release. I've not gotten all the way through it yet, but what I've listened to this was definitely interesting for sure. Tell us about your vault pick this week.
Yeah, interesting is a good way to put it, I think. But as far as my plans for the vault moving forward, I at least want to start going back through my collection. I may kind of do a rotation as far as different gimmicks each week, just to kind of keep it fresh, where I don't feel like I'm plodding through the alphabet every week. We'll see. I have some thinking to do, but I figured I'd at least start with this because it's an easy thing to go back to.
Yeah.
So for the letter A, I am looking at the 10th studio album from the Canadian thrash metal legends Annihilator. It is their 2004 album, All For You.
Yeah, I've listened to the first 4 tracks off of this album, and I think all 4 of them sound completely different from one another. I don't know how many albums I've listened to lately where I can honestly say that's the case.
Yeah, this album really kind of blew me away back in the day, because it felt like they were revisiting every kind of sub-era of the band, for all the way back from Alice in Hell to Set the World Afire to some of the stuff they're doing like Carnival Diablos. There's so much to get into, and it's a wild ride, to say the least. This is the first album to feature Dave Padden on vocals, and the second with Mike Mangini on drums, which is crazy because you think, oh, he must have been on their last album. No, his first album with the band was 1993, Set the World on Fire. So even though this is the second one with him on it, he just came back for this album, actually. He had taken some time away. Annihilator, the band, got its start back in 1984 in Ottawa, Ontario. And much like Megadeth is Dave Mustaine, Annihilator is Jeff Waters. He is the band. If you look at the list of band members for Annihilator, you'll see a fairly lengthy list, but this man at one time or another has done pretty much everything for them, whether it's singing, whether it's lead guitar, bass. He might have even drummed, I can't remember now, but he's written the songs, he's produced the music. The guy can do everything. if you look through that list, some of the notable names do include Mike Mangini, who played on the album Set the World on Fire from 1993, All For You in 2004, and Metal in 2007. I mentioned Dave Patton as the vocalist on this album. He was with the band from 2003 to 2014. And Stu Block, who joined the band back in 2022, most well known for his time as the singer for Iced Earth. Jeff Waters himself is well renowned in the metal community. He was named the third best metal guitar player in Joel McIver's 2008 book, The 100 Greatest Metal Guitarists. He was asked to audition for Megadeth back in 1989, but opted to hang with Annihilator. I think they had just signed a record deal and things were looking good for them. It worked out for both parties, though, because ultimately Megadeth would hire Marty Friedman. What I love about this album, like I mentioned, is it feels like you're hitting every era of the band in one nicely packaged album. If you like thrash metal from the early days, you got that. You got some ballads. You have moments of goofiness that would have fit in on Set the World on Fire. And it still kind of feels relevant to the music of the early 2000s. It doesn't feel like some weird, dated throwback. It feels really fresh. Standout tracks on the album include the title track, All For You, Dr. Psycho, Demon Dance, The One, Holding On, and The Nightmare Factory. Not a place to go to learn how to wrestle, but this one, The Nightmare Factory, it's toward the end of the album, has one of my favorite intro riffs of all time. It's not super complex, but once it picks up, it rocks. Like you can't help but really get into the song right from that moment on. I think Jeff Waters and this band is crazy underrated. Their sound is kind of shifted over the years, but his musicianship is always crazy, and he tends to have really good people playing with him as well. And check out any of their work, but if you're looking for something with a good amount of variety, I think All For You is definitely a good option.
Yeah, like I said, I'm interested to go back and finish listening to this album because those first 4 tracks couldn't have been any different, and they all sounded like Annihilator, which is kind of wild that you can sound so different and yet not betray what you are as a band.
And while not on this album, I think it is worth mentioning, if you go back to Set the World on Fire, the second most famous maybe or second best song about chess is on that album. It's not One Night in Bangkok, but it's still pretty cool too. But yeah, that's kind of a wild album as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in checking that out. I assume that's Night Jumps Queen.
Yes, it is. If you know what I mean. That's the lyrics.
Oh, that's well, yeah, I can see why it's not maybe better than One Night in Bangkok, but that's
a weird song to compete with. It is. It's on a different planet.
It for sure is. But yeah, like I said, really impressed with these guys. They've been doing it forever and doing it at a very high level, and probably a lot of people haven't checked them out that probably should. So definitely encourage you to check them out, and whether it's this specific album or possibly any one of the albums off of their collection, because they've got a lot of good stuff. So, and they're still doing it.
Yeah,
they're still out there. So maybe we'll come across a new Annihilator album sometime down the road on this podcast. But definitely check those guys out. I have been going through year by year, and it has become increasingly difficult to do so each and every week for my vault pick. We're going to do this for 3 more weeks, this week and 2 more, and then when we get through the 2020, we're going to jump into a different gimmick for the vault because 2018 was really thin as far as stuff that I'd even heard. I know Mike's going to give you a list of some things that he wants to check out, and because there's just not a lot that we had, and one of the albums he owns is the album I ended up picking for the vault pick. But I did want to shout out Mania from Fall Out Boy, included Champion, Young and Menace, Last of the Real Ones, at least a couple songs on there that I had heard. So that qualified you for the list this week because that's just how thin it was. Ended up picking the album, one of the ones that Mike owns from 2018. It is the 4th studio album from the Swedish rock band Ghost. It is prequel. Had listened to the hits off of this album, listened to the whole album today for the first time. Talk about an easy listen. Like, it is almost alarming how easy it is to listen to this album. Like, I get that, Ghost has that melodic sound and that's what drives it, but this is just such a smooth album, really from beginning to end. I think most people would probably know the two biggest hits off this album, Rats, which was actually nominated for a Grammy, and Dance Macabre. Those are probably the two. If you don't know anything else off of this album, you would know those. But honestly, you should listen. If you like those songs, you should go back and listen to this whole album because it's really good. You look at the influences of Ghost, and it's like, of course, like, because I think people get wrapped up in the visual, the upside down cross and the all that stuff. It's like these guys are, influenced by 70s and 80s rock bands and theatrical bands and progressive bands, and you can kind of see it all in everything they do. And this is just really good. I was kind of blown away with how good the whole album was. Like I said, I'd heard the hits, but honestly, the whole album was just really excellent. And like I said, I know you know this album even better than I do, and you own this album. And we'll start with this one. Your thoughts on this Ghost album?
Yeah, it's funny because people do kind of get into that. Ooh, Ghost isn't metal debate, and yeah, they're not, and that's fine.
Yeah,
they don't have to be. If you look at Wikipedia, they mention one of their genres is heavy metal, but I think they're definitely more in the arena rock, pop rock realm of
for
things.
sure.
Like they are ultra poppy, they are sing alongable. You think of like the videos for Rats, and I think even Dance Macabre. It's like there's like dance numbers in them. Like Rats feels like a harder rocking Thriller if you watch the video.
For sure.
It is so not metal.
This is a group that would have been if they were 10 or 15 years older, they would be on Frontiers.
Yeah.
I think they have that sound that would fit
way,
right in. Yes,
but I mean they're from Sweden already, so they got that going for them.
For sure.
But yeah, the album is solid. Everything they do is just solid. Another notable track on there is they have a cover of the Pet Shop Boys song "It's a Sin."
Yeah.
Which is a great song. There's also another cover of that song that Gamma Ray does, which is amazing also. But yeah, they're not heavy. They're just fun to listen to.
And I feel like that just fits in with so much of the stuff we talk about each and every week, where it's like, yeah, they're metal because that's where there's just nowhere else to put them, but they're not something that's going to make your ears bleed when you put it on. I mean, the two picks I had this week would have fit on a bill with these guys.
Yeah.
They're just melodic and enjoyable, and just almost if smooth metal was a category, that's what these bands would be, because it's just, you have electric guitars and you have riffs and you have the things that make up metal music, but there's nothing hard about it.
And I love the idea because we always associate that like the satanic imagery and any of that dark look to metal music, but I love when it's being done by a band who's decidedly not ultra heavy metal. It's almost like why would metal have the trademark to that? Like why are they the only ones that are allowed to have spooky imagery? Like that doesn't make any sense, and Ghost does it probably better than any of them.
Yeah, and obviously they're getting ready to go through their new lead singer, who's obviously not. It's still Tobias Forge,
and he's not really the Pope, I heard.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say, but those guys are, like I said, they're really good. They're really talented. If you know what you're getting out of those guys, I think you're going to really enjoy it. If you're expecting to hear Slayer when you put those guys on, then you're going to be disappointed. Yeah. But like I said, if you're a fan of this podcast, Ghost should absolutely be in your rotation.
I'm waiting for Ghost to cover Seasons in the Abyss, and it'd be like some sort of disco-sounding song. I think they could probably pull that off.
There would be people going to Sweden with torches probably, because those Slayer fans, although they're all 70 years old, are crazy. Like I don't think that's a good idea to antagonize those people. But
they should mellow out. Let's be real.
Maybe at this point, probably. But
I don't think we need more people carrying torches in any Norwegian country. I think, or Scandinavian country. I think that's the last thing we want.
Probably so. But yeah. So definitely check this out. I know this. You think you had 2 albums from this year.
Yeah, the other one I had wasn't even a new album. It was a re-release, like the 3rd or 4th remastered version of Megadeth's "Killing Is My Business."
It's a great album.
Yeah, and I feel like every time they're just like, turns out we didn't include everything. Let's throw something else in there. I think the big thing anytime they re-release that is whether or not they can include the their version of These Boots.
Yes.
I think this might have been the one where they actually re-recorded the lyrics, and he sang the right lyrics, which doesn't work for the song for me if Megadeth's singing it.
No.
But yeah, one of my favorite is if you line up the debut albums from the Big Four, you know, Kill 'Em All is probably the most polished as far as a complete album, but Megadeth's is just so ferocious.
It is.
So fast, so heavy. I think the earlier releases, when the production maybe wasn't as high quality, almost make it more insane. But obviously, if you haven't listened to Killing Is My Business at this point, any version of it is worth checking out. Great tracks: Last Rites, Love to Death, Killing Is My Business, Skull Beneath the Skin, Rattlehead, Chosen Ones. Mechanics, if you like the Four Horsemen by Metallica, it was originally Mechanics by Megadeth, or by Metallica that became a Megadeth song.
Yes.
Couple of the underrated ones, though, I think Looking Down the Cross is a great song. So is Chosen Ones. Just a great album and a sign of things to come for what Megadeth would become. So, yeah, definitely not a lot of music on my iPod from 2018, but...
Was there anything else from the year that you wanted to point out while we had a moment?
You know, I was looking down the list of the Wikipedia list of albums released in 2018, and there are some that I think maybe I'm not dying to go check out, but I feel like maybe I should have at least given them a fair shake. Avatar had a new album in 2018, Avatar Country. Stone Temple Pilots released their first album with Jeff Gutt on vocals in 2018, another self-titled album, oddly enough, but I've not heard any of their music with him as lead singer, so I think that could be kind of interesting. Red Sun Rising had an album in 2018, Thread. I really enjoyed their Polyester Zeal album from 2015. We also had new albums from Stryper, Seven Dust, Lordy, Bullet for My Valentine, Alice in Chains, Clutch, Good Charlotte, Coheed and Cambria, Atreyu, and Metal Church. So there's stuff out there to check out. I just, for whatever reason, during 2018, just was not with it as far as consuming new music.
I was just bummed as I read down that list of albums that I recognized more names of people that have been in the news lately for weird reasons, like Lil Yachty and J Balvin, who both released albums in 2018.
When I saw J Balvin's name, I'm like, I know that guy. He's a terrible voice actor. And I think that's the thing it hit me for the first time for the 2018 vault was like, that's not very long ago, really.
No, it's not. That's 7 years ago.
So when I'm seeing all these names that I've heard recently, it's like, well, of course I have. Like, they didn't just magically start existing in 2024 or this year.
When I first heard their name, like, they've been around.
And I looked like that J Balvin. That was like his third album or something like that. It's like, man, who would have thought that he would be voicing a character in Solo Leveling in 2025?
Well, I'm not sure. When you say don't quit your day job, I'm not sure which one of those I wouldn't want him to, or would want him to quit at this point.
And I don't even know, because like watching the Chibi Reviews video talking about the voice acting job that he did, he talked about this dude so much for being on Fortnite. I guess I didn't realize that he's actually more well known as a singer.
Yeah,
that's more his actual thing, not so much the Fortnite character or whatever, but. Clearly, I was out of my depth. I was not aware of this guy. In the most recent Solo Leveling episode, you don't hear him speak, so it's all good.
Yeah, I guess it is. But like I said, we'll be doing this vault gimmick for 2 more weeks, and then we're going to jump into something else because, like I said, it has been either stuff that we haven't listened to or just there's just less stuff out there that we want to listen to. So that is going to wrap things up for this week's edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Great to have you along with us once again. A reminder, we'll be back in about 12 hours and 30 minutes with another episode of the Nerdcast News Report. We're going to talk all things Elimination Chamber, including John Cena's shocking win and aftermath of the Elimination Chamber. You definitely don't want to miss that. Coming up at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow morning. A reminder, next week we'll be back 3 o'clock Eastern Time. And again, we have the time change next Sunday, so make sure you adjust your clocks accordingly. We'll be on an hour later or earlier. I don't remember. Just know that we're going to be an hour different, and we're also going to be at 3 o'clock. So maybe that'll make it a little easier anyway because we'll be at a different time. But join us next week. Join the Discord. You'll find out because that clock sets to your local time, so you don't even have to do any math in that case. But join the Discord. We'd really appreciate having you. Big thanks to Chris and Rachel for joining us tonight. Big thanks to Mike for putting all this together and joining me in the studio. And a big thanks to you wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. But that is going to wrap things up. We'll talk to you again tomorrow here on the Nerdcast Empire. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.